The term philology is derived from the Greek philologia, from the terms philos meaning love and logos meaning word or reason. So you get a word that means a love of learning, a love of literature, argument, reasoning. Very complex word, and it's a word that fits what we do on this show very well. And joining me today to expand on his knowledge and practical use of philology is my friend, host of the InnerVerse podcast and co-host of the Inner World podcast. My friend Chance Garton joins me, Mystic Mark, here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy this conversation with Chance Garton.
This is the correct Orthodox chronological period. Orthodox meaning this is the amount of time that the priests of the Orthodox Christianity say period of time was. And if we add then in the same manner 28 to have two more series, making 84 times 42 times 2 times 71.5, we shall have 6 series for the 6,000 years, which completes the mythos. What is he talking about? Why is this 6,000 important? It's all about the year 6,000, actually. In the classical Jewish sources, the Hebrew year 6,000 marks the latest time for the initiation of the Messianic age. The Talmud, the Midrash, and Zohar specifically say that that's the date by which the Messiah will appear, 6,000 years from the creation. Now, the belief that the 7th millennium will correspond to the Messianic age is founded on a universalized application of the concept of the Sabbath or Shabbat. In Psalm 90, verse 4, one of God's days is believed to correspond to 1,000 years of normal human existence. Just as in the Bible, God created the world in 6 days of work and sanctified the 7th day as a day of rest, it is believed that 6 millennia of normal life will be followed by 1 millennium of rest. And that sanctified day of rest and peace, the 7th day of the week, representing a joyful time of being satisfied with completion of your labors of the previous 6 days. In the same sense, the Jewish tradition says that the 7th millennium will correspond to a universal day of rest and peace, or completeness of the work performed in the previous 6 millennia. So this relates to the millennial reign of Christ.
Ladies and gentlemen, here we are back again on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast with a guest who's returning, long overdue, someone who, when I think about the early beginnings of this podcast, when I think about the first really close connections I made as a podcaster, the InnerVerse podcast comes to mind. And of course, the host of the InnerVerse podcast, Chance Garton, who's just been a wonderful peer of mine, friend, someone who I've podcasted with a lot in the past, not so much in the recent few years, but we're getting back together here for a reunion podcast, not only to talk about everything that's been going on in the world, but everything that's been going on with InnerVerse and Inner World, which is your supporters, sort of members only side of the show. But without further ado, Chance, welcome back, brother. Happy to have you on the show. How are you? How have you been?
Dude, I've just been wonderful. The thing I'd add to my introduction is I'm now officially Father Chance.
Father Chance, congrats.
That's been amazing. Loving the dad life. If I seem a little less sharp than usual, it may be because a lot of energy goes into this infant care thing. I mean, my wife does 90% of it, but then I got to pick up the slack of the things that she can't do. Not to complain. It's the best time of my life. And honestly, can't believe it's been as long as it's been since we got a pod in. Definitely not intentional. No slight to you, my friend. You're crushing it. And I'm excited that we get to have another collaboration.
Yes. The reunion, long overdue. And you are Father Chance. It almost sounds like you're like right up there with Father Time and Father Math. Like Father Chance is such a strong title. I love it. We need to officialize that somehow.
Father Time is something that I'm particularly interested in lately, as you know, we're going to talk about, I think, moving away a little bit from the concept of syncretism. You know, I have nothing wrong with the idea of syncretism, and I think synchromysticism is a totally different bag, but there is a type of monomyth that exists in our civilizational history, in my opinion. Now, if that's because of cultural diffusion, or if that's because of some kind of innate archetypes in the human psyche, or because of forces inside of us or outside of us or both that are seeding these ideas into our consciousness, such that through different symbols we come up with basically the same story over and over again. I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit of A, B, and C. But the chief archetype of that monomyth is Father Time, Kronos, who in the show that you alluded to, Inner World, which is one that I do with Dylan Secotio, there is actually a lot of free parts of that out there on YouTube and on my RSS feeds. You'll see about 30 to 60 minute long episodes in the free section. But if you go get on my Patreon or Dylan's Substack, you're looking at more like 3-hour long episodes where we deep dive specific topics. And my favorite one of all 11 that we've done so far was about Noah, actually, and how Noah is the archetype of Kronos, and how this creation and deluge mythology overlap so strongly. And we can circle back around to that, but this is some of the things that I've been most fascinated in lately. Absolutely fascinated.
Yeah, I definitely want to circle back to that. But before we do, you just gave us the broad strokes of the concept there. What facilitated this shift from syncretism to centrism? Because the way I understand it, syncretism almost pulls certain threads and finds patterns in different cultures that maybe have no organic relationship other than, you know, simultaneously existing. You know, there's not a lot of cross-cultural pollination, so to speak, yet these separate cultures hit on similar themes, and then the syncretists come in and say, oh, see, it's all the same story just being told different ways by different cultures. Is that kind of what syncretism is? Is that maybe a less nuanced way of understanding it?
Yeah. So in the past, I'm definitely somebody that's been guilty of saying this thing here is that thing there. They're the same. And I'm not going to throw out that we can make these kind of connections between cultures. But where it all started for me, actually, in my spiritual journey in general, aside from the things that I was brought up with, raised Christian, started out in a Baptist church, fire and brimstone, very scary. I saw Zeitgeist, right? Who didn't see Zeitgeist back in 2006, 2007, whenever that was? I was a junior or senior in high school, and in that movie, the narrator goes on to describe about a dozen different solar deities and claims that they are all born on the 25th of December and this and that. And the way that was all thrown out in the Zeitgeist movie, it had a really damaging effect on me psychologically for quite a few years, which is that I went full atheist. I went, oh, well, this must all be a trick then. If they're all the same story claiming to be different things, and if Jesus is actually just a repackaging of this more ancient concept, must be all fake. And that was not a healthy approach to it at all. And I actually recently heard a friend of yours, somebody I'd love to talk to someday, haven't managed to quite line it up, but Christopher Knowles, right? The great synchromystic champion, Christopher Knowles. And he was knocking on this type of this avenue of sync work too. And I think he even brought up the Zeitgeist. I think this was on the Higher Side chats. He even brought up the Zeitgeist paralleling, and how over it he was, how stupid it was.
Well, and Chris has his way of being very to the point about things. So yeah, he said something to the effect of, yeah, that dumb, stupid Zeitgeist movie that everybody, yeah, I get what you're saying. Right. So, and it happened to me too. I think it was high school as well. A girl who sat next to me in math class that I had a crush on told me to watch the Zeitgeist. And it had a similar effect on me, but I was already like so in that realm. Like I was reading all the memes that were being posted by people who just watched the Zeitgeist film, and that was enough for me, right? Like I didn't even need to watch the film. I just was already living through a lot of those ideas. But I agree with you. It is almost like a very limited hangout kind of spiritual concept. Almost like the same way we talk about certain ideas in the ufology community as being limited hangout, where they give you just a piece of the truth, but then the rest of it's fantasy. Feels like Zeitgeist was a bit of that. Would you agree, or is that kind of where you're going with this?
Yeah, I'd even take it further that Zeitgeist was some kind of operation, psychological operation to lead people to leftism and communism.
Wow.
Because
it sounds
you see
like
the follow-up movies to that, which I guess you probably haven't seen, but pretty much that's the direction it goes. Is without saying, "Hey, we need communism," they pretty much just lay out that a communistic type worldview. And I didn't ever quite buy into that, but man, was that effective on my psyche, especially because the following years we saw the Occupy movements. The first conspiracy information that I really dug my teeth into was the banking system and fiat currency. Which, that's a doozy. That's a doozy. And when you're young in your college years, definitely want to feel like not so apathetic because that's sort of the default. But I was deep in a state of apathy. And that atheistic bent that the Zeitgeist version of syncretism threw out there was a big part of it for me that was so damaging. I didn't realize it at the time. But I jettisoned, it was like a throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. I jettisoned all notions of spirituality. So when I talk about syncretism versus centrism, I got the concept from reading a fantastic early 20th century author, René Guénon, who I still have a lot of his work left to read. But one of the things that he highly criticizes is the theosophical movement. And they were big into this type of syncretism of this over here is exactly the same as that over there. And why, I guess where the critique is important to make is that type of syncretism can be so super dismissive of the point, I guess. And especially why I like to bring all this back into the lens of a sort of Jungian depth psychology, because it's more valuable instead of trying to take pieces of the puzzle that are spread out around you in a circle, right, in different parts of the world, and smash them together and say they're all this thing. It's really more helpful to look at them from a inner perspective, like they're coming from some kind of internal world of humanity and then radiating outwards from there. Right. So it's sort of like just reversing the way you look at it. I'm maybe not explaining it the best, but
no, I love the way you're explaining it.
What we want out of our sync work is to be able to see the similarities between symbols and mythology and religious traditions as our ticket to see what was actually there spiritually, like what the truth, like the spiritual truth within it was, rather than just sort of getting lost in the sauce of, which is where I've been a lot in the last couple of years of all of the, comparative analysis without, despiritualizing it in a sense, not intending to, but sort of just getting stuck on the pattern without actually looking at the source of the pattern. What's the source of the pattern? Why would this be coming up? And that's where I'm at now, is I really want the philosophy, not just like the heady pattern recognition, but I really want to get to the root of the philosophy and see if there's something that can be helpful to us
beyond that surface level. I really respect the humility to admit that. I think there is a really important point you're making here about the way people tend to go about researching these things. And it's a byproduct of theosophy, a little bit of the Zeitgeist movie, and maybe some other cultural influences. But theosophy, I want to touch on that for a moment, because if you only just hear secondhand accounts of theosophy, it sounds like this really interesting thing. But if you go and read the authors from that time period, and I've done this to some extent when I was younger, and what kind of moved me away from a lot of that material was the repetition. And I started to see that a lot of these authors are cut and paste type of authors, where at the time they were making money selling these books. So to go and gather all of these patterns and put them in a book made a lot of sense to them, because they were A, trying to make money, and B, maybe trying to build a case for this theosophical spiritual movement. But it is an economically motivated thing, that whole world of theosophical pamphlets. Like, they were competing with each other, and there was maybe something beyond the truth that was motivating them to write those pamphlets. You know, the almighty dollar, possibly.
That is a really good insight. I appreciate that. I'm going to integrate that insight as well, and check into the veracity of what you're saying. But it makes perfect sense to me, especially of what we know of a lot of those less than reputable thought leaders in the theosophical movement. But moving away from theosophy specifically, I do want to, I'm not completely ruling out the type of syncretism that demonstrates a potential universal system of priesthood or worldwide priestcraft system. I think that there's evidence for that. It's kind of like something that's been on my radar lately is that 24-hour sun quote experiment in Antarctica. It's not really an experiment, it's an observation. But we don't want to get into the type of logical fallacy that, if this isn't true, then the competing model must be true. So in terms of models of how we see these seeds of symbolic similarity between cultures around the world across many different epochs of time, just because I'm leaning more into something about consciousness is doing this perspective does not mean I want to throw out that in some cases, or in a lot of cases, it was a diffusion of a sort of control system, a priestarchy, because I think that's there too. And my buddy Dylan, who I do this Inner World podcast with, he is way more into trying to, and this is a lot harder work too, so I have mad respect, but he's way more into trying to get the trail of the actual historicity of what's claimed about the ancient world and the movement of ideas, concepts, technologies, writing systems across cultures. And I have a ton of respect for that. I feel really blessed that I get to work with a guy on the level of Dylan in the shows we do. But because that's his strength, and because my interest is now more in the philosophical and the spiritual, kind of see us like a really good yin and yang combo to tackle questions that we approach. So I'm definitely not ruling out that there's potential of a system here that is man-made. I think that there's a little bit A and a little bit of B.
Yeah. Well, and it's starting to become a little clearer to me, at least what you're saying, and that's that there is a pattern, but that pattern, at the way it's presented in the Zeitgeist movie, almost is like disenchanting. It's like, hey, here it's all fake. It's all just cookie cutter, man. Don't pay attention to it. Whereas there is a pattern to it. You can maybe think of that in our modern terms and get caught up in, they're just copying each other, and maybe miss the point that they're not actually copying each other, but there is an archetype that changes based on what culture's talking about it. but it remains that archetype, right? There is this sort of human ultimate, I guess, right? That you guys are tracing with this show. And Noah would be a good example of a character who not only exemplifies some characteristics that go beyond the main story he's known for, right? You made the connection between Noah and Kronos, but correct me if I'm wrong, or if you see it differently. The flood story, this is a story that's universal, right? So this is going along the same lines of what the Zeitgeist suggests, but taking it in a different direction. There's a different implication here that, oh, it's not that there's one guy and everyone's just telling a different lie about him. What is it then?
There's so much gravy in the comparison of Noah to Kronos. It's one of my favorite subjects. And then once you start to unravel that particular conspiracy cardigan, in the words of Greg Carlwood, you will notice that, oh, actually, Kronos is like secretly the guy who is behind almost all of these mythological heroes and fathers of many nations. It's pretty amazing. But about the flood, maybe before we get into this specifically, in it's much the same way as I'm describing wanting to hold both possibilities in my mind at the same time, the psychological and the historical, the cultural diffusion and the archetypal essence of these mythologies, holding both at the same time as possible influences. The flood myth is the same thing for me. And I lean more towards it being an astrological metaphor, to be honest, than a universal deluge. And there's plenty of evidence for that. But I also hold space for the possibility of an age of cataclysms and catastrophes, rather than maybe one big one, possibly multiple in different areas. Not sure. But one thing that adds to the weight of a possible age of cataclysms is the psychological trauma that is passed generationally throughout all of known human history. Michael Tsarion is one of my favorite philosophers of the modern age. And in his book, Dragon Mother, he talks about his theory that a previous age of catastrophes took mankind from living in this sense of protection and support with nature in the abundance of a type of hunter-gatherer existence where all needs are met, provided for, and humanity felt relatively safe and secure on Earth, to all of a sudden seeing nature as adversarial, seeing life as, a zero-sum game that people are still playing out today. And that the trauma of this age of cataclysms is actually reverberated from mother to child throughout the generations without being resolved in any significant sense other than by a relative few individuals who've done it for themselves throughout the ages. And as you explore, his reasoning for that belief, it's very sound. And then you haven't even brought up, but my other gig is I'm a biofield tuner. So I work with people's energy bodies, balancing off-balance energy that has everything to do with memory and repression. And absolutely, there are the echoes of ancestral trauma in everybody. I try to stick within the framework of the person's own life, but sometimes we have to. Sometimes, and one of the best examples was I worked with this lady. This is a while back, but one of my favorite examples. I worked with this New Zealander woman. She was really lovely. We actually had 3 sessions, I think. And the first one, she comes to me because she's having this acute tachycardia, which is that her heart will just start racing very uncomfortably. And she wanted to get to the bottom of it because it just come out of nowhere. She'd been otherwise quite healthy her whole life. And as we start to explore in her energy field, I find this information in her energy field that suggests to me a grandparent. It was, I don't remember if it was it was definitely the maternal, pretty sure it was the maternal grandmother, right? So I start asking her about the maternal grandmother. I say, was your maternal grandmother in a traumatic situation where she was isolated from her husband, or her husband was away or gone, and that there was a severe threat to her life that was terrifying? She's like, yeah, my maternal grandmother lived through the bombings of London in World War II, and her husband was off fighting the war. I was like, okay. So there's more intricacies to it in terms of how her personal life was reflecting this pattern of fear. But suffice to say, once we worked that out, the tachycardia problem went from a level 9 out of 10 concern to about a level 2 out of 10. And then in another session or two, we were able to find a few other patterns, including actually for her another sort of ancestral generational situation, which is not even that common for me to run into, and resolve the issue completely. So my point being, there is strong evidence when you look at how unbalanced society is at large to say, it's like, why? I get it that there's always going to be strife and struggle in the world, but like, why is it so messed up? It's like it's beyond what it needs to be for the simple needs of our souls, hero's journey, struggle, and growth. You know what I mean? It's really out of whack. And I think that strongly supports the possibility of an age of catastrophes or a deluge or something. But back to what I said at first, there's all the reason in the world to think that it's astrological metaphor. Maybe the astrological encoding of that comes from an actual deluge. I don't know, but that's my setup for, I'm holding both ideas in my mind. I'm not trying to claim I know one way or the other.
Yeah, that's a great place to be. I agree with that. And we had Bibu Dev Misra on the show a while ago talking about the Kali Yuga cycle. And I think there's something to that, particularly when you mention the astrological influence and how, the constellations, they're moving in a sort of cycle with us, right? There's different...
I want to believe we're leaving the Kali Yuga right after my birthday in March. I want to believe.
Well, yeah, that's what he suggests is March 2025 in particular. Thank you for reminding me. And yeah, what that means, who knows? But apparently we have already, if we're exiting the Kali Yuga, then we've already been through this sort of the brunt of it, I think. But I think there's also allegedly a period of cleansing by fire, which the Greeks called ekpyrosis, and on the opposite end of the cycle would have been whatever the Greek word for deluge is, right? So it's like yin and yang, essentially. You have at one end of the cycle a fire destruction, and another end of the cycle a water destruction, and they even each other out. So yeah, I mean, if we just went through the water destruction, so many years ago, and we've been carrying that with us, and through this fire cataclysm that we're about to go through. As a biofield tuner, I imagine you are on the front lines as far as someone who might be able to help people with that trauma. Is that kind of a correct way to think of biofield tuning? Like you're getting in there and helping someone reorganize the different things going on in their energy field that could lead to, disease and other problems?
Absolutely. So in terms of collective trauma, say lockdowns, back in 2020, these things actually leave an imprint in most people's energy field. And an example for that would be a guy I was just working with who started having like involuntary muscle spasms and twitching in 2020. And why that would happen to him and not somebody else has to do with his overall psychological conditioning in the negative sense throughout his life regarding feeling that other people controlled his life. And you see, the basic premise of all psychosomatic healing is that your body is in your mind, not the other way around. So when it comes to looking at symptoms, you got to look at them as symbols. And that's very, very helpful, especially to resolving them. And in this gentleman's case, it was the fact was that he felt so controlled by other people so often, or out of control of important things in his life, that his body reflected this by manifesting involuntary, out of his control movements. You see what I mean? Just like his body's moving outside of his control. Exact same thing as what he felt was happening in his life. Now, different people are going to have different responses to potentially the same traumatic event. And when it comes to the actual healing and resolution of trauma, and why I think the modality, and I do, and those that are similar to it are so effective, is because it's not about finding out what happened or how it made you feel, or just going over every list of bad things that ever happened to you, like you might with a mainstream psychiatrist, and just beating that dead horse over and over again. It's actually very simple. You just need to know how the trauma affected your behavior, the sense of your personality, who you think you are, what you think life is, your expectations about yourself and your life, and how that trauma formed those expectations or that belief of your personality. If you can connect A to B and realize, oh, I act like this because of this experience or these similar experiences that have happened repeatedly, that's really the big healing moment, the epiphany. Because then every time you go to repeat the behavior that maybe you don't like, you're never going to forget, oh, wait, I just did this as an adaptation to these childhood traumas. That means that it has nothing to do with my innate self, who I really am. Whereas the traumatized person is a fear response. So they behave as if they have no other choice, or this is just who I am, or I can't change it. So that's, the simple nutshell of what the modality is all about. What makes it so powerful is we can go through and find the instances of particular patterning and most prominent instances of it. And maybe we just need 2 or 3 data points of memory that we can pull out of their energy field to establish, like, hey, here it is when you're 19, here it is when you're 25, here it is when you're 36. Same exact symbolic situation. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this was happening over and over again. And actually, I can think of 3 or 4 other times that this type of situation has occurred. And that's the resonance of expectations. That's the resonance of what you believe life to be, repeating itself. And in a Jungian sense, it's your inner world boomeranging out back at you from the outer world. So I wanted to comment on Babu Dev Misra. And if you hear my baby, then just congratulate me that we have a sweet crying baby girl. I like his work. I'm not knocking the guy. I think that in terms of researching the Hindu priesthood and their system of the yugas and those cycles, he's done a great job with that research. All I'll point out is, having looked at many different cultures' versions of world age cycles, and that's actually what the Noah story is all about, is the world ages doctrine. And the Bible is too, secretly. The one thing that the priesthoods of Earth have been consistent about when it comes to making predictions with cycles is that they're wrong, and they change their mind about what the length of times of the cycles are to try to fit to historical events as they are aware of them. And, so it's always changing. Does the Savior incarnate every 600 years or 650 years or 608 years or 1,000 years? It depends on who you ask and when. And so that's how I look at the yugas. It's the same as like what I consider pop culture Gnosticism, the demiurge, the fallen world, the prison planet, .tv. There's all these people that are really quick to comment about higher dimensions and heavens above heaven and things that, even if you had some kind of personal experience with, it's subjective, and ultimately you're making assumptions about realms and supernatural realities that you have no way to know about. And that's when we're talking about millions of years and the day of Brahma and stuff like that. Like, maybe, but we're here about 70 to 100 years. So nobody's actually seen this cycle. We're just going off of hearsay. So, believe what you will. That's all good. And I'd love for the world to go into a great upswing in March. I'm definitely not against that possibility. But that's how I see the yugas. We're commenting on things we have no way to know about, and we're giving credibility to establishments that their main consistent characteristic is their wrongness, is not being correct. So it is what it is.
Yes, a good reminder that we should be skeptical and not always buy into some well-worded myths, but yeah, it's compelling stuff. I want to go back to what you just said, though, about the Bible secretly encoding this information. Is this part of what you uncovered looking into Noah deeply and his connection to Chronos?
Yeah, it is. It is. There's a section in the book of Matthew, and I wish I had this one pulled up in my notes. Maybe I have it in this page. No, I don't. Okay. Actually, I know exactly where it is in my notes if people will bear with me.
Yeah, take your time.
It's worth it. So, the Bible obviously has a lot to say about generations. And maybe before I even get into the New Testament example that I wanted to give as a perfect demonstration of my reasoning, we should talk about what the world ages doctrine actually is. And one thing that people might not know when they're reading the King James Version of the Bible is that almost every instance where you see the word world, the term used in the Greek is Aeon. Whoops. Whoops. And that's not the same as our word world. Now, to the mystery school tradition, it actually was, because those concepts were synonymous. That an aeon is an age, and the world is defined by what age it is in. So there's a new aeon or a new age. And also, Aeon was the name of this guy, Chronos. And you've probably seen him in depictions. They might say that it's Phanes, they might say it's Mithras, but there's this lion-headed dude standing on a rock or an egg, and the zodiac is around him, and they say that's Aeon. But the beautiful thing about looking at the physical archaeological evidence for various deities and whatnot is that the establishment can't even agree on who it is that they're looking at. So my personal theory in this kind of is more on the syncretism side, but with the intention and goal that we're going to find the spiritual truth within it, is that much of the multiplicity of the different gods and goddesses from the ancient world, especially in the Greek and Roman parts of, and Babylonian and et cetera, the ones that we have more fingerprints and traces of. My working observation in this point of time is that there's actually not nearly as many deities as we are given. And that where these systems originated from, the gods had many different names, titles, and epithets that would then be mistaken by later authors as names of a different god. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, like a bunch of nicknames and then, AKAs. And then later on, hundreds of years later, they're like, oh, okay. So, the Notorious B.I.G. and Biggie Smalls and this other rapper all did this album, right? But really, we know, oh no, that's all just one rapper, right? Same thing, same concept, different, multiple names for one being.
Yeah, and there was also points linguistically where adjectives didn't work the same way, or they didn't even exist in the language the way that we use them. And so you'll see you'll see a deity or a hero described as the son of the north wind, or the son of the sun, or the son of God, etc. And in terms of language tropes from the ancient world, often, if you're going back far enough, what that actually was is their way of saying that they're like the thing. saying something was the son of a thing was saying that it's like that thing. And man, does that throw us for a loop in our modern world. We're like, literally, it says he's literally the son of Boreas, the North Wind. So, we're really in a rough position trying to interpret the meaning from the ancients at all. So it's a fun puzzle to get into. And that's why hopefully maybe in this conversation, we can also talk a little bit about philology and the philological lockpick of letter swapping.
Yeah, tell me about that, because you mentioned that before we started recording, and it seems like it's key to how we are to better understand all of this material we've been left with. And, some people have sort of haphazardly translated it into maybe a misunderstanding, and philology might help us get a better understanding, right?
Absolutely. So one thing that's been fun for me is in the last 2 years, I became an uncle, and now I've become a father. And other people who have children who listen to us talk about philology and things on my podcasts have brought to my attention the ways in which their children do these type of letter swaps naturally. And it's great. It's great if you have that perspective of seeing it in real time. Like a perfect example is the ancient Greeks would often interchange the letters B and P. And then later on, they just threw out the beta. And I mean, the letter beta still existed, but it just made the sound of a V. So that's a perfect one to start on. That the letter B can also become P, can also become V. So if you ever hear like a toddler, which I've literally heard toddlers do this, you ask them did you do a poo-poo? And they'll say, boo-boo. They do that. It's, and you think about one way to understand these letter swaps is just think about what your mouth and your lips are doing. And poo and boo, not that far off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So these things are very natural
even
to
the
human
English
speech
patterns.
Patterns.
The English character, or at least the lowercase p and the lowercase b, are just like mirrored upside down. It's the same character, just mirrored upside down.
Exactly. And so when we know this, I mean, this adds a lot of context to looking at the names of different deities. Right. For an example, where's this guy from? I mean, there's different versions of this name. I think it's a Chaldean deity, Belus. And Belus is a type of Chronos figure and a wisdom imparting cosmocrator who, if you do that letter swap, it becomes Pallas or Pallas, which is the name of the Greek goddess of wisdom, right? And so looking at that from a sort of syncretic view, you have the story of Belus being that, first of all, he slays a mother of monsters type deity that was named like Omorica, which is odd. And he cuts her in half and makes the heavens and the earth out of, the two halves of her body. The next thing that Belus does is to cut off his own head, which is wild. And then from the blood of that, it's the other deities create humanity. And that's said to be why humanity takes part in the nature of the gods and the ability for wisdom. And so one of the things about this that's so awesome is when you know about this story of Belus, the Chaldean story of the beginning of our current incarnation of the cosmos, the symbol of the head that is also where the human race is coming from becomes like a dual symbol with the cosmic egg. Because the division or opening of the cosmic egg is the beginning of the cosmos, while the opening or the division of the head from the body of Belus is the creation of the cosmos in this other version. And so we now can sort of put them in the same category. Okay, symbolic head and egg are similar symbols. And going further with this, Noah's Ark itself is one of the symbols that fits into this category. It's the thing that opens, that begins the new world. The current age began when Noah's Ark opened and humanity reemerged, right? Similar deal of goddesses that give birth to the cosmos in some way. So the goddess, the ark, the egg, the head. And doesn't that just add a bunch of context to the symbolism of severed heads, like the head of John the Baptist for the Templars that they were allegedly using for fecundity rituals? Well, what does a severed head have to do with fecundity? Or the oracular properties of these severed heads, like Mimir in the Norse mythology. And again, the head of John the Baptist it had oracular properties. And where does the goddess of wisdom, Pallas, Athena, Bellis, Pallas, where does she come from? Do you know this one?
No.
She springs from Jupiter's head.
Wow.
She's born out of his head.
Well, and what is the head of government or the governing body typically held in the palace, right? Which is the name of this being, Bellis, palace, right? Fecundity, a word I've heard yet do not understand. I thought you were talking about the oracle, but then when you mentioned the oracular nature of these decapitated heads, I said, well, maybe I don't know what fecundity means. So
it's a good word. It means producing or capable of producing an abundance of offspring or new growth. In other words, it's fertile.
Okay, because you're familiar with something that I've been obsessed with, which is the whole Skull and Bones cult in New Haven, and one of the
my birthday's 3/22.
Right, we've talked about this, and yeah, it's a whole fascinating saga down there in New Haven with Geronimo's head, and now that you put it in these terms of fecundity, I'm like, maybe they are taking the head of the indigenous peoples, the First Nations, so to speak, that were fighting against them in this war, the United States versus Mexico, very much part of that were the Native Americans and Geronimo. So by taking his head and bringing it back to New England, is that a way of taking that energy and fertilizing New Haven with it, right? I mean, it's really fascinating to think about that in
exactly.
That way.
Wow. You're seeing the point behind it, possibly. Yeah. It's about, and especially when you consider that this Bellis figure from the Chaldean myth was the first guy, the first being. So the first peoples, you're taking the head from the first peoples. It's like definitely a replay of that. But then going further into, well, what's the philosophy here? What's the inner meaning? What's the centrist meaning here? Well, it's all in your head, man. Like the whole universe is in your mind. There is no universe to exist without consciousness to observe it. Your body is in your head rather than the other way around. And even this, you can see this in the Bible, where in Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, right? In English, in the beginning, God created. Well, it's not really what it says. In the Hebrew, it says the first word is barashit, which has a lot of compound words in there, but the first letters are bet resh, which is like a word that means to form, create, or form. It's usually translated as bra, but as you know, they do not have vowels in Hebrew, so it's claimed to have been pronounced barashit, but it's bra, ras. The next word is ras. Well, ras means both head and wisdom in Hebrew, and also in ancient Etruscan. So right there, the first word is by wisdom or formed through the head. So out of God's head or through God's wisdom, you could say, except it doesn't say God. It doesn't say Yad-He Vav-He or Adonai, which is the most common name given to God in the Hebrew of the Old Testament, Adonai, which is that's the Phoenician sun deity. Oops, Adonis. It actually says Elohim, which most people think is Elohim, but it's a feminine termination in the Hebrew, meaning goddesses plural. So formed through the head, goddesses plural, the cosmos. That's a more direct literal translation. So again, like once you take this from a centrist point of view, the philosophy of these cosmologies is trying to point to us that that it's a mental, it's like a hermetic principle of mentalism. And I think it may seem like so obvious to more of our psychedelically inclined audience that this is, of course, this is a mental plane that we're experiencing. And the mental is the primary attribute, right? But to the religious minded people out there, they're all caught up arguing about like a physical being, like, God in some other higher realm, bearded guy for creating the universe, right? And even down to the point of, another point of contention is that word bra is highly contentious among linguistic scholars, whether it means to create ex nihilo, like out of nothing, or whether it means to form something, as in the materials already existed. And that's why you got to look for deeper context of the world ages doctrine when it comes to the Bible to know whether or not it meant one thing or the other, because according to the world ages doctrine, the material of the universe is eternal. The physical matter of our universe has always existed. And then it in sort of a cyclical way, it goes through an ordering process, becoming more orderly, and then becoming more chaotic and dissolute. So that's the world ages doctrine in a nutshell, is that on a cyclical pattern, the world is destroyed and regenerated, but the physical material of the world was there to begin with. And that's something that I think would be a much healthier perspective for a lot of Christians out there that could understand that actually in your own scripture, this is indicated if you go beyond the English translations that have been offered you and really get serious about trying to research the inner meaning, the centrist meaning, because instead of the world being like this fallen place, it would indicate if the material of the world has always existed and it's just gone through an eternal cycle of creation and destruction, then, well, what is the attribute of eternal? It's divine. Eternality is an attribute of divinity. And this is what the ancient mystery schools taught, was that the physical earth itself and the material of the earth itself was the body of the deity, and that the savior figure, or the Chronos figure, same guy, the reincarnating firstborn of the first cause, the first mind to emerge, or the eternal mind that orchestrates, or the soul, the one soul that portions out itself to each living being, is the masculine principle. The material world is the feminine principle, and that both principles are divine. I think it's much more, in terms of cosmology or philosophy, it's just much more healthy to appreciate the divinity in all the stuff rather than look at it as like dirty or fallen or lesser or base. Because you're made out of this stuff, man. Like what's a healthier self-esteem, that you're made out of gross matter, or that, oh, this is the body of my goddess, the mother,
right?
Well,
and I'm so much more in favor of that interpretation than what's been presented, at least in the past, in my lifetime, and what looks like the past couple centuries. Not just Christianity, but the whole world has sort of leaned towards materialism. And one of the most disagreeable interpretations of the Bible that I've ever met with was this whole idea of dominion, that, God gave us the earth to dominate it. That's how this phrase is interpreted. But I've seen it interpreted as, well, God gave us this land to take care of and to be a part of and to live in symbiosis with, right? And a different interpretation that seems to gel with what you're suggesting, that, the earth itself and we being composite parts of the earth organized into these marvelous beings, we are actually a part of the body of the God itself. This is going back to Bibu. This is like the whole Brahma idea, right? That Brahma is the Aeon, and we're just one part of his body, right? Or a part of his life. It's very syncretic, but I think to re-examine it from this centrist perspective, that these are all radiating outward from a center of truth, and that's why there's a pattern. It's not that one is wrong or one is right, or any of that. But I would like to get into some more examples on how we can see this in the Bible, or this whole concept.
I know I keep opening up ideas and then getting on to tangents.
No, it's fine.
It's
let me just grab a glass of water. Yeah, I think there's so much in the Bible that gets misconstrued and used in this dogmatic, political way, when the essence of the Bible, the true original teaching, it's so far from that in many ways. The way it's sort of reused in this political way. So yeah, how can we see this world age cataclysm story in the Bible? Where is it lingering there?
Well, apart from most of the stories in the Old Testament, like a great example, okay, obviously we know Noah is an example of the world ages doctrine, because the humanity, ends and is bottlenecked down into one father. Whenever you see a great father of humanity or father of many nations, you're looking at a Chronos figure. So obviously that is Adam. Adam, especially, you got to think about the wording in the Old Testament in Genesis. It doesn't say, God doesn't tell Adam to populate the earth. It says replenish. It's really a specific word, right? Why would it be replenish? That means to do it again. And then after Adam, there's, let's see. Yeah, Noah is after Adam. Bottleneck of humanity there. Great father of many nations. Lots of more syncretic gravy about the Noah story. If we have time, we can get into some of those details. Then you have the story of Abraham and also his nephew Lot. Both of those are examples of this. Abraham and Lot are more like regional deluge mythology. But the story of Lot, for people that aren't familiar, is that he was the one righteous man in Sodom or Gomorrah. He was in Sodom, but the two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, pyroclastus, destroyed by fire. And as an intercessor or mediator figure, that these incarnations of the Son of God or the Savior tend to be, Abraham actually prays to God to intercede for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. God's like, unless there's 50 righteous men in those cities, I'm destroying it. And Abraham's like, well, what if there's 45? Would you really destroy it for 45? And God's, if there's 45, then I'll save it. And Abraham's like, but what if there's 40? Would you do it? Would you still do it if there was 40? And God's okay. If there's 40, then I'll save it. And then Abraham's like, but 35 though? If you'd really destroy it and it goes on. It's funny. But anyway, God ends up Yahweh Adonai destroys the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his family or his daughters leave. His wife gets turned into a pillar of salt, very much like the Orpheus myth when he's trying to bring his beloved out of the underworld. And then Lot ends up in a cave. This is the cave of Brahm. This is the enclosure, right? It's the egg or the ark. It's an enclosure that they go in to ride out the destruction. And actually in that destruction, there's flooding described too, not just the fire. And while Lot's in there, his daughters are like, well, our father is the last man on earth, so we got to repopulate. So let's get him drunk and seduce him. And that's another attribute of the, like the drunkenness is another attribute that's attributed to Noah, to Bacchus, to a lot of these same figures. That's a fun overlap, is that Noah was the giver of the knowledge of winemaking and the vine. That's one of the ways he's syncretized with Bacchus, actually. But anyway, this is obviously a world ages situation, because usually the destruction has to do with the encroachment of chaos or evil. right? That's the Noah version. That's this Lot version. And this is just biblically speaking. That's the book of Revelations, if we skip to the end of the Bible. And the fact that they think that the world is completely destroyed. They don't know that it was just in that region, but it plays out the same theme, even to the disgusting incest situation with his daughters. Anyway, going beyond that, Abraham being the father of many nations is sort of a microcosmic example. And then let's just jump up to the book of Matthew. Get this pulled up. Yeah. I know it's in here. Thought I pulled it up. But there's a really great, Can we pause for a second? Do you have the ability?
Absolutely. I'll just say the word edit, and then when I go back and edit this, I search the word edit, and boom, we just edit this part out. It's that simple.
Yeah, because I want to find the specific verse.
Take your time.
Beautiful. Okay. I know it's in here.
It is interesting, the point about Noah being drunk, and I forget where it came up. I think it was my conversation with Dr. Amen Hillman, the infamous and controversial, where he very much focused on that, and he focuses on the sordid parts of what people don't want to talk about with the Bible. Whether that's true or not is a debate in itself. I don't really feel like I should participate in, but yeah, it is strange when you hear those stories, like, and some people are like, oh, well, it's just, that's just a myth. It's the way there's an allegory there. They're not actually implying that, Noah was, this sort of incestuous father. But then there's the other people who are like, oh, no, that's actually literal, and we're supposed to take everything literal. So this guy, actually did have this sort of disgusting approach. But hey, what do you do at the end of the world and there's no one left but you and your daughters? I guess that might be a choice some people have to make. But anyways, were you able to dig something up there?
I found it. Yeah, I found it.
Cool.
Okay, here we go. Yes, this is it. I'm ready.
Take it away.
So in the generations of the Old Testament described in Matthew chapter 1, verse 17, it says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. And one of my favorite authors, Godfrey Higgins, author of Anacalypsis from the early 19th century, he gives a good explanation for why we see the repetition of 14 in these generations to Christ. He says, surely nothing can have a more mythological appearance than this. We must not forget that the Bible says the age of man is 70 years, by which we have already seen that the sum of 72 years is almost uniformly meant. Why is Higgins saying that? And why do we assume 72 when we see 70? It's a thing about approximating that is part of the priesthood system, and it relates to the one degree of precession of the equinoxes. Like 1 degree of precession taking 72 years. The tendency of this rounding is demonstrated with the Septuagint, which is the name given to the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, also known as the 70. They call it the 70. It's called the 70, but it was said to have been translated by 72 Hebrew translators. But it's called the 70 because of the number of translators. The point being, this is something that there's precedent for. And in reference to these groupings of 14 in the biblical genealogy of Matthew 1:17, Higgins continues to say, these 3 series of generations make 42, which multiplied by the precessional number, which is really about 71.5, equals 3003. If we add 14 more generations before Abraham to the 42, it equals 56. So we shall have 71.5 times 56 equals 4004. This is the correct Orthodox chronological period. Orthodox meaning this is the amount of time that the priests of the Orthodox Christianity say period of time was. And if we add then in the same manner, 28 to have 2 more series, making 84 times 42 times 2 times 71.5. We shall have 6 series for the 6,000 years, which completes the mythos. What is he talking about? Why is this 6,000 important? It's all about the year 6,000, actually. In the classical Jewish sources, the Hebrew year 6,000 marks the latest time for the initiation of the Messianic age. The Talmud, the Midrash, and Zohar specifically say that that's the date by which the Messiah will appear, 6,000 years from the creation. Now, the belief that the 7th millennium will correspond to the Messianic age is founded on a universalized application of the concept of the Sabbath or Shabbat. In Psalm 90, verse 4, one of God's days is believed to correspond to 1,000 years of normal human existence. Just as in the Bible, God created the world in 6 days of work and sanctified the 7th day as a day of rest, it is believed that 6 millennia of normal life will be followed by 1 millennium of rest. And that sanctified day of rest and peace, the 7th day of the week, representing a joyful time of being satisfied with completion of your labors of the previous 6 days. In the same sense, the Jewish tradition says that the 7th millennium will correspond to a universal day of rest and peace, or completeness of the work performed in the previous 6 millennia. So this relates to the millennial reign of Christ idea that people are into right now in the conspiracy sphere. The 1,000-year day of God, like one day for God is 1,000 years here. That's very similar to these ideas of Hinduism, a day of Brahma, although that's longer in the Hindu system. It's the same idea. The time moves differently. And they calculate this also in patterns of 14 manvantaras, they're called, each one lasting 71 yuga cycles. My point being, in the biblical chronology, they're still using these same sacred numbers, the 14, the 70, 71, 72, somewhere in there. And back to Godfrey Higgins, he explains why in his quote that I just read was he adding additional generations to the 42 in the Matthew account of Jesus' genealogy. And this required him to quote the Roman mythological historian known as Nimrod, who says, as to the Manichaean romance legends, Manichaeans were the first to name Jesus Christ, the succession of the great Abad, Bauda, or Abaddon from the bottomless pit, that's Buddha, and the 13 Abads implies the 13 generations of Solimans, or theranthropic rulers from Adam to Nimrod. Let me translate that. He's referring to incarnations of the Savior, because each of these cycles of 1,000 in this particular version of the system are marked by the incarnation of a divine being, or the Son of God, or God himself made man. So the great Abad or Buddha and the 13 make 14. And this makes up the correct number to complete the mythos, as it is evident from Nimrod that the Manichaeans made it out. Besides, it appears that the reckoning by periods of 14s is exactly in character with gospel history. The author of the Cambridge Key has made an observation which shows, in a very striking manner, the universal nature of the mythos, where he says, I may observe that of the first 14 dynasties of Manathon, 7 are without names, and that in the first 14 dynasties of every other nation, the same omission is observable. The Hebrews only gave the names of Adam, and the 6 princes in the race of Seth, Adam's son, who reigned in succession. The Hindus and Chinese give the first created and the 6 princes in the same line, the Chaldeans those in the race of Cain, and each of these nations omits the names in the other race, that is, the names by which they were known as sovereigns. The Old Chronicle, which treats of Upper Egypt, gives the dynasties, or more properly, reigns, complete, making Noah the 14th. So this might have been a little hard to follow, but essentially they're trying to account for, and I think that this is correct. There was a series of 14 generations before Abraham that's not named in Matthew, like it's implied. It's esoteric, if you will. So what we're seeing here is that the Bible is describing the world age doctrine in the way that it's genealogically listing via sets of 14. And the world is destroyed and regenerated on this cycle of 6,000 with a new incarnation of Adam or Noah or Jesus, same guy, spiritually speaking, their reincarnation occurring at these points periodically. The rate of the incarnations differs depending on the cult and the time period. But, in the Bible, I think otherwise, without this kind of lens, why would they be giving this very specific information of the generations in these sets of 14? So hopefully that kind of shows the evidence that I'm trying to get at in as concise a way as possible, with as a specific example as possible, why the world ages doctrine is implicit in the Bible if you can read between the lines.
So
and of course, the millennial reign of Christ in Revelation, like the world is destroyed and remade, right? But he gets a new body. What does that mean? It means that all of the people that lived are going to live again. That's essentially what the destruction and regeneration of the ancient mystery cults in terms of world ages was about. That in some instances, they even asserted that everything that ever happened was going to happen again the same way. So that's like the new bodies, the fresh bodies that the dead are going to get described in Revelation.
This is incredible, Chance. I'm glad that we're talking about this, and it fits into some of the ideas that have been batting around on the show in the past few months. But I did some short math after going to Shabbat.org and seeing that the year 2024 is on the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, the year 5,785, which means we're only 215 years away from this 6,000 year point, which would be in our year of 2,239, which just so happens to have that 322 number backwards in there, 2239. I mean, look at that. What are the odds? So are we suggesting that this is the big date that the Bible kind of warns us about, and different groups of Christians have come out and said, they've erroneously given other dates, but is this the date, 2239, where maybe the Messiah's reign will begin?
Personally, I don't put any stock on one version of the cycle over another version of the cycle.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't. It's fun to think about. It's fun to imagine. And I do want to say that I'm not throwing it all out conceptually. I really like the concept of the world itself as an egg, the cosmic egg idea. Because part of this thing is the microcosm, macrocosm, as above, so below concept, that just as the Savior is born as a man, and then like in the Hindu tradition, they have Manu, who is the Adam figure, and he reincarnates at every destruction regeneration point, gets on a boat and survives a deluge or a destruction. And he, he's also related to, on the big picture scale, Brahma sleeping and waking. And I think there's a really fascinating concept when we consider back to this depth psychology, collective consciousness, the outer world being the furthest layer of our psyche that is most solid and concrete. That it's cool to imagine that the reason why the world, or a way of understanding how the world seems to move and flow in these syncretic, synchromistic patterns. Like, what is orchestrating this? Why is it all, how does Gematrinator notice these patterns of celebrity death at the same time as a sports team winning by a certain number, and like it all by the numbers just fits perfectly, and it's mind blowing. You know what I mean? You've seen this, the level that the sync work can go to with the Siren saga from Christopher Knowles and things like that. It's beyond our comprehension. And I'm entertaining of the idea that in the like what this world ages doctrine and all that is referring to is that there's actually one mind here, that we're sort of like cells in a bigger body, and that like how long does it take to birth a human out of a womb? It's approximately 9 months. We can estimate that it's 9 months, but it's not the same for every birth. So if what this whole system is trying to point to is that at a certain interval of time, the womb that we call Earth and life in this world gives birth to a divine being that is a fractal order of magnitude, dimension of scale up from our birth in this smaller world, then, and what would that mean for our smaller world? What does it mean for the cells in the body of the cells that comprise the body of a fetal baby? When they come out of that womb and into the world that they're merging into, well, it means like a big burst of growth and energy, and there's a flood. There's like the waters break. It's hard to imagine what it could possibly mean. I think that it could involve the earth itself growing, potentially. I think that there's reason to believe that. Like, I'm definitely not on a spinning ball flying through a void. And so I entertain lots of interesting possibilities. So that's where I'm at with it, is first of all, if there's an as above, so below, like fractal dimensions of scale resonance going on here with what the ancients were trying to tell us about with this world ages stuff, and that it pertains to the birth of a divine being, which to our perspective would be like the next level up in size and power, so to speak. Just like to the cells of our body, we're God, we're the thing that holds it all together. We're the thing directing the show. We're bigger than them, beyond reckoning. Then, that could be what's up. But there's not actually consistency to how long a pregnancy lasts. Our baby took 41 and a half weeks. So it's all, in my opinion, estimates. It's estimates and all that. But it's never going to be an exact science. And in fact, I don't think nature tends to do things exactly the same way twice ever. Look at two versions of the same plant, not identical. Look at, there's no identical two of anything, even identical twins. They can be very different. So hopefully this makes sense. This is just my wild philosophical speculations, right?
You're making a lot of sense. And, we talk a lot about the fractal nature of our reality. So why wouldn't, the organization of things be fractal in this sort of, super biological way, where just like we have many different organisms that comprise our single organism, we're many organisms that comprise this great organism that is God. And I think that's something that, human beings may have no capacity to truly understand, just like one mitochondria in our body can't really fathom our personality or our what our favorite drink is, right? That's not up to your average mitochondrial body to determine that, but it's a part of it in a weird way. I love this stuff. So you mentioned something about a hierarchical priesthood, and I might be putting my own words to that term, but it seems like in this centrist view, there is some sort of organized structure in the middle, right? But is it in this kind of conspiratorial way where we're like, oh, well, this is the they, or is it just that the human species itself tends to create like a head of itself where certain people form the brain side of the entire population, whereas other people fill in the function of, take your pick of another part of the body. But in that fractal way, can we interpret, individuals and their human output into society as representative of like different parts of a greater body, right? The same way we have these smaller organisms within our bodies.
That is a very interesting question. And, I have to think about that one. I think a lot of conspiracy, truth or culture is really wary of hierarchy, very anti-hierarchy. And as someone who's just become a father, it's become all the more clear to me that there is natural hierarchy and that that's not inherently evil, that there is natural authority in the world, you know, the parent to the child relationship. But when it comes to a lot of religions, the priesthoods tend to co-opt authority in ways that are unhealthy. You know, and even secret societies that have doctrines and teachings that are philosophically sound and beautiful, like Masonry, for example, can have bad actors or groups of bad actors within them. They use the knowledge differential for negative purposes, right? Like I'm not somebody that is anti-Mason or blaming the Masons for all the problems in the world, for example, although that's really, you know, that's very popular in conspiracy truther world. I'm not saying that Masons had nothing to do with it either. But what I mean is like looking at the teachings itself, the philosophy itself, it's an attempt to the exact thing that I'm describing, or seems so to me from what I've read, the centrist view, to look at all of the different expressions of humanity's attempts to comprehend the divine and get to the core meaning and the spiritual truth of it, which I think is beautiful and great. In terms of like how different organizations might function as parts of a body per se, I'll have to give that more pondering. But when you think about the role of the psychopathic elite or what have you, or the warmongers and the Israels of the world and etc., right? In a sense, I think everything comes down to choice and free will, and we get what we wish for in the world as well. That nobody can make you do anything, right? And so when these bad people, bad power holders in the world are influencing, say, a bunch of people to get the old cowpoke, you know, that experimental medicine that has done so much rampant harm in the world. You could look at it like in a body sense, that it's a sort of, I don't necessarily believe in the immune system as described, right? But just as a metaphor, it's like a waste removal process, you know, like a purification process. Hey, if you are so unconscious that you're going to accept or do this to yourself per se, well, then this existence of these power hierarchies that are influencing that decision, they're sort of there to clean up. I'm not saying take out the trash like I'm calling humans trash. The unfortunate thing is a lot of people did it they thought they were doing it for the right reason. And then they had a terrible, result. But like I'm thinking of my uncle who died of suddenly after receiving it. And I loved that guy. He was a really good guy. But he was also wildly unhealthy in a bunch of ways. I didn't want to see him go, but you could look at it like maybe that was sort of a detoxification process of the collective body. I don't want to look at it that way necessarily, but in the way you're asking the question, I'm like, do the cells that need to die in your body because they are in some form of degradation, do they want to die and be flushed out of the body? Maybe they don't, but it happens. Are the parts of your body that initiate that process and do the cleanup and sweep them out, are they seen as tyrants by the ones that are having that happen to them, or the ones that are witnessing it happen to the other ones? This is where my mind goes with that question. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I like that. And I think we come to that point on this show often. Sometimes I'll use the analogy of just the ecosystem of the natural world. And, we don't think of lions as evil for, doing the things that they do to survive. But if you film them and watch, all the gory, bloody details and only saw it for that, you might start to think that lions are just this brutal, awful creature. Or if you're a human being living alongside of lions and they come and attack you, yeah, you're going to think, wow, these beasts are terrible. I don't want any part of living alongside of them. I'm going to kill them, right? Because it's you versus them. So, but then from that zoomed out perspective, sitting on the safety of your couch, you're like, no, don't kill the lions. They're so beautiful, right? So there is this very interesting way of looking at it. And we tend to think of the elites as parasitic and the virus of our, collective, but maybe it's more, they're just,
well, they are. I mean, it is parasitic, right? But the parasites serve a purpose in nature too.
Right.
They show up to clean up something that's out of balance.
Right, exactly. And what a better way to understand our society than as out of balance? I mean, in so many ways it is. So, yeah, if this is the sort of natural checks and balances to a human population, I think that's a really Zen way of looking at it. And, we might need that, considering how fear-laden and cortisol-ridden this topic of conspiracy becomes. So many people just get amped up. And I was talking to Michael Hoffman about this, and he made this point recently, too, while he was on the Higher Side Chats. I did help arrange that, but we're not going to spend any time patting myself on the back. I think that was
a good chat.
It was a good chat.
I think I heard him on your show too. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't agree with Michael Hoffman's conclusions in a lot of places, but I think he's a good researcher and I like listening to him talk.
Well, and that's why I raised him as a point of discussion in this sense, because he isn't someone that maybe everyone agrees with, but he made a really good point about how most conspiracy truthertainment is just designed to, distract and keep you in this sort of cul-de-sac of consciousness, which, I hope conversations like this can help break people out of and start to think more openly and not let all these ideas bog them down into the whole cliche of black pilled, because red pill is just one pill away from black pilled. I think that's really, we're not trying to red pill anyone on this show either. But when it comes to the overall, world we live in, to see parts of it as evil in a way is like seeing parts of your own body as evil, which, I mean, what a schizophrenic way to live your life, And
it comes down to blame. That's what a lot of the criticism I would level at truth or conspiracy entertainment is the blaming. Because the fact is, regardless of what is going on anywhere, anytime in the world, you always have the ability to create a good life for yourself. You don't get to decide how long that life is, but you get to decide how good it is in the time that you have. I've been really into the Wheel of Time book series. I just recently discovered there was an Amazon adaptation, which I thought was decent, but I'm starting to get into the books. I'm like, oh, the books are way better. And that author, Robert Jordan, clearly knew about the Chronos monomyth that I've been just barely touching on in this conversation. But one thing that they say in that in that world is the wheel turns as the wheel wills. And so that's the case. That's true. But to bring it back to depth psychology and what I thought was the most important kernel of truth right in the beginning of every cosmogony, that it's all in your head. It all comes from the head or the mind. And that mind is described as the mind of God, but in a further interpretation of this, it's that your mind and the mind of God are not separate. Not that you are the God of the cosmos or in charge of everything, but that experience of consciousness is a universal, indivisible, primary essence of reality. And it's the same experience for all consciousness in any depth of scale. And so in understanding that mind is primary and taking it into the Jungian realm where we can see the layers or the concentric rings of that psyche or soul, that you have your ego mind, your conscious mind, what you can pay attention to in any particular moment. Then you have your subconscious, which is filled with all these belief programs that influence the things that arise to your conscious mind. And then you have what is left out of this understanding is that as you move further away from yourself, that the world itself is actually a layer of your psyche. And once you can start to internalize that, first of all, it will help you make sense of the synchronicity, or help you become comfortable with the level of synchronicity, because I think synchronicity can get so jarring to people that are just starting to wake up to it that it's easy to revert to the blame programming that is so popular in trutherism and say, oh, well, I'm being controlled by archonic forces. And that's why, and you can even get into sort of negative synchronicity storms, right? Sure. We've all kind of felt that. But the case is that your relationship to these archetypal concepts or archetypal forces, or what you could even think of as the first divisions, or like the spokes of that wheel of the eternal, indivisible self, that there's the one, there's the zero, there's the everything that is nothing. And then there's the one, which is the firstborn of the first cause, or the trunk of the tree of life. This would be Jesus, Mithras, Horus, right? Just go on down the list of all of like the savior, sons of God figures. And then there's big branches off of that tree. The next level of division, that you could consider that like the pantheon or the zodiac signs. And then continue to levels of division until you have the level of multiplicity that we have of all humanity, right? But all of these are radiating from the same center, or emanating, they call it the doctrine of emanations. And what that means is that center is your consciousness. That's still, that center is the same center for everybody. We are all the center of the universe, of our universe, subjectively. And so all these archetypal divisions emanate from our center, which means that our beliefs, it's really a conversation. Our conversation with these archetypal forces is not a one-way street. We are not controlled by these archons, as they're called. They are as much dependent on our view of them as we are on their influence on us. And that's something that, again, to go back to biofield tuning, can be a big part of the experience of tuning, because the way that we experience these archonic archetypal forces is most commonly through our friends and family. And maybe you guys have experienced this example I'm going to give, but like you decide to move on in life, decide to leave your job, or kind of stop hanging around with a certain friend group. And you move into a new place and you meet new people, you get new coworkers, you find a new friend group, and you realize, hey, this guy is a lot like my old friend, this guy, but he's a better version of him, or he's a worse version of him. It depends on, are you better or are you worse? When this first came up to me, like I really noticed it was very specific time where I had a close friend from back in high school who really didn't believe in me becoming a podcaster when I was first starting out. He really gave me a hard time about it. And I stopped associating with him because I didn't want that energy of doubt towards my dream. And as I moved away from that friendship and let it go, it wasn't but like a week or two later that a listener, and this was the first time it had ever happened because I was really early in my journey, a listener reached out to me, and he was unusually tall, the same unusually tall height as my previous friend that I'd let go of. Their names were similar, and he showed me a lot of support, and he became my friend for a while. So my point being that like the archetypal energy, I let it go for the sake of wanting a better version of it, sort of, you could say. And it comes back to me in a better version. So everything that we let go of in terms of our our rigid view and perspective on it, allows that force or energy the freedom to come back to us in a transformed way. And depending on whether or not we are holding a better level of energetic coherence, the amount of charge that we can hold in our battery is a good way to put it, our electrical capacity, determines how dissonant or harmonic that return of that force is into our life. And so consider that with the idea of the elite and the system and the government. I think it's really important that while we can be realistic about the problems we see with those things, and definitely not dependent on them to be our saviors, if we can let go of the belief that it's strictly like the government is slavery, full stop, Mark Passio, whom I used to really, I really learned a lot about mind control and stuff from Mark Passio, not knocking it. But in my opinion, if we can let go of some of the rigid perspectives we've developed towards these forces that we see as negative and archonic in our life, maybe it's possible, especially if we do it for ourselves, if we make ourselves better and improve our lives and are better to the people in our lives, the best of our ability. Maybe, just maybe, some of these forces that we've seen as rigidly evil and bad could start to undergo some transformative effect. Because when you think about like government and societal systems, technically all that infrastructure could be awesome. It could work really great. It's just not working right now because people in those positions are so corrupt and whatnot. And maybe there does need to be some structural change and all that. But, I'm not trying to sell like hopium that it's going to fix itself. But my point is hopefully that you're understanding that the degree to which these external rigid systems of negativity exist as dominators and bad influencers in our world is directly related to the degree in which we lead ourselves astray in our personal life. And the more you can hold coherence and harmony inside your energy field and in your belief system and give yourself the potential of expansion and the potential that everything is actually awesome rather than terrible, the less that whatever is bad about those things will hit you and directly influence you. And maybe even will open up the potential for them to shift in positive ways. I know I might sound way too hippy-dippy right now to some people, but I think that this is the case.
No, I agree with you, and I've experienced that in ways in my own life too. You grow and the people around you grow with you, and yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people have experienced, and whether they've taken time to reflect on it or not now could be the moment that they do and say, oh yeah, wow, that has happened to me. But you mentioned earlier how Kronos, this figure that represents this sort of cycle, the age, the Aeon that we're in some ways reflects Christ. And, we're heading up to only 3 days from now, Christmas, which is, a big American milestone of the year, big holiday for many people, both Christians and non-Christians. It's become kind of a consumerist holiday in many ways. Takes over December, whether you're, a Christian or not. But talk to us about your view of Christmas from this philological point of view, this centrist point of view, because we hear often from the conspiracy point of view, oh, well, the tree that you put up, that's Osiris, and oh, well, this is actually, based on Krampus, and Krampus is a demon, right? It splinters into so many weird explanations when you get into where Christmas comes from and what it's all about. So how do you view it from your point of view?
All right. Well, maybe I'll just talk about Kronos a little bit and relate that to the idea of Christ. And then we'll get into Christmas itself to the best of our ability. So first, I think it helps to do a little syncretism. All right. So we've already we've already identified how Noah and Bacchus have these correspondences. In fact, a lot of the philosophers of earlier eras directly correspond Noah with Bacchus. And the Roman title of that deity was Dionysus or Dionysus. All right. That's Dio, which is God, and Nous or Nous. Nous means mind. That's Nous, or it's spelled in the, in the Roman, it's Nys. But if you understand that Y is a Greek upsilon, then you get the word Nous, which is the Greek word for mind. Now that's basically, it begins and ends with the consonants N and S. And in philology, one of the plausible swaps in terms of consonants is S with H or S with, and this happens by way of, there's different ways it happens, but primary way that it can happen is by way of S and C. And the letter, you know what I mean? Like the letter C can also function as a S, and it can also function more like a K. If you get a throaty H or a throaty Hebrew hey, then it's like a C. And so this is where I'm coming from. And in fact, I'm definitely not the only person to assert this. A lot of way more learned philologists than me have said that the Hebrew nun hey, which is how Noah is spelled, is the same as the word Nous. Now, interestingly, is also philologically the same as Nox, N-O-X, the night. And that's what these egg-born deities come out of, the night or the darkness or the chaos, Aeon, Phanes, Mithras, Brahma, etc. So if we're able to correspond Noah with mind, Nous, that makes sense. He's the father of humanity. It all comes from the mind. Doesn't get much more obvious than that. Now, other than being the first planter of the vine, the patron of agriculture, Noah being renowned for a story of his drunkenness and teaching winemaking to the post-Diluvian world, Bacchus was exposed in an ark on the surface of the ocean and was thought to have died during the flood of Deucalion. Deucalion is a Greek version of Noah. He's the flood hero too. Afterwards returning to life, so death and rebirth. The Orphic hymns are one of my favorite places to go for a very ancient text that we have a decent knowledge of how old it is, in my opinion. What's the word for that? Provenance. And so in the Orphic hymns, they go through, each stanza is them talking about a different god. And you read it and you understand very quickly that, oh, it's all the same God. These are just different attributes of the same God. And we'll get there. So Protagonos, the firstborn of the first cause, son of God, the first being in existence. The poet of the Orphic hymns says that he is twofold, egg-born, and wandering through the air. That's basically like the sun. So the sun is part of this correspondence system as well. Let's jump to Helios. Self-born, Lord of the seasons, with a fiery car, that Helios is the father of ages, and that he is the immortal Jove, too. And then it says of the moon, Selene, she is the mother of ages, both female and male, and that she's the all-wife, and Diana as well. Well, that's also Jove, or Jupiter, said to be eternally a man and a maid, twofold. Bacchus is said in this hymn to be twofold, just like Protagonos. He's called firstborn, but thrice begotten, born 3 times, two-horned and crowned with a laurel. So this highly important work is basically saying that Bacchus is also that from which the race of gods and mortals springs, if he's the same as the Protagonos. And then in Kronos' line, it says, he's the father of vast eternity, and that no parts peculiar can thy power enclose, diffused through all from which the world arose. Which is saying that Kronos is the world's soul, or the mind. That's the same concept. And these are just the highlights. I do recommend looking up the Orphic hymns. Not a long work. Definitely one of the most blatant ancient sources that shows that these gods are the same and that they resolve into a trinity that is really one God. If we go to Colossians in the Bible, the New Testament, it says, oh man, this is such an important part of the New Testament. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. So, according to Orpheus, Zeus was the same as Pluto or Dionysus. Macrobius, the ancient author, claimed that Dionysus was the soul of the world, or the soul of Zeus, Dio Nous. I've already explained that. Polyphanes applies this to Kronos, or Saturn, saying that the name Saturn means the mind that created or planted all things. We go to the very beginning of Christianity. One of the most important fathers of the early church, Augustine of Hippo, in The City of God, Book 4, Chapter 11, says, the reason why Christianity is preferable than paganism is because they worship Jove alone, and they acknowledge all of his parts in his singularity. And he basically makes the case, he's like, hey, you guys know that all these other gods that you worship are just parts of the one God. You're worshiping the goddess of the hearth and the god of the fields and, et cetera, et cetera. But why risk pissing off some parts of God by forgetting them and only worshiping specific aspects? It's better to just join Christianity and worship just Jove, the all, because then you don't run the risk of missing something. And that's essentially, I think, what is lost about Christianity, that in the words of Reverend Robert Taylor, a heretic of the early 19th century, wrote The Devil's Pulpit, one of the first people to expose astrotheology in the Bible in a comprehensive way. Excellent work. A little angry, but lots of great burns. He went to jail for his work on astrotheology, actually, but he was a card-carrying member of the church. And he says Christianity is about as different from paganism as 6 from half a dozen. Those are his exact words. And that's not to diss either one of them. It's just to understand that two things were going on with Christianity. First of all, it was the attempt to sort of simplify the very complex spiraling out and ballooning out of the different gods and goddesses and the different parts of the one being into just one being again, so that it's not so complicated. And so it's easier for people to maybe join up with and not be so confused by. That's one possibility. Another thing about Christianity is that they're taking things that had existed in the mystery tradition from time immemorial, and they were secret rites and secret ceremonies, and making them public, which actually pissed a lot of people off. And it's harder to find the traces of evidence for this, but they do exist, because a lot of the pre-Christian philosophers and authors specifically didn't write about certain rites and ceremonies because they were meant to be secret to the mysteries. But a good example that demonstrates it is how, and I've done a whole episode of our Inner World show about this, but the Melchizedek figure in the story of Abraham in the Genesis book, when Abraham meets King Melchizedek, king of peace, king of Salem, king of righteousness, high priest of God, Melchizedek does a sacrifice of bread and wine. This is the Eucharist that Jesus does in the Last Supper, sacrifice of bread and wine. And without being able to go further into the details, there are fingerprints that throughout history that demonstrate that this bread and wine, this feast of bread and wine, or sacrifice of bread and wine, was a ubiquitous quality of the mysteries. And it's still alive today. Like after every Masonic Lodge meeting, they have a feast. It's just part of the deal. I think it makes sense. Like you get people to come to your club by feeding them, right? Like why? Of course, that's always going to work. But the point being that it wasn't unique to Jesus to do this bread and wine ceremony. It was far, far older. And as far back as, the mythological times of Abraham, even, because this high priest of God, Melchizedek, was doing this same ceremony. It also exists in Buddhism, definitely in Buddhism, because they didn't want to do animal sacrifices. It was a way to move past the burning of burnt offerings of flesh that were seen as, a little more barbaric. But when it comes to Christmas now, like, what do I think about Christmas? Because it's a little bit of a different topic. I see it as, first of all, it's clearly back to Zeitgeist, it's clearly about the death and resurrection of the sun, right? I don't know about you, but I feel it so strongly. Like I feel the solstice right now, like in me. The flow state I could get into in this conversation was so hard to access in the last couple of weeks up to now. When we cross that point of the solstice, I literally feel recharged. Because to me, it's not so much about what point the sun is at. It's about the direction we're going, in a sense. Like, we're back on the upswing. That's why I love the idea maybe the Kali Yuga is ending and we're going to be on an ascending cycle. That would be great. I love it. But there's a lot more you could talk about. The polar tradition related to Christmas, the tree being representative of Tree of Life or Mount Meru or the Sacred Center, the North Pole, et cetera, et cetera. Go see my friend Mario at Symbolic Studies for comprehensive decodes of that symbolism. But definitely Christmas is something that is beyond, this idea of the death and resurrection of the Savior corresponding to the cycle of the sun as it. I don't think I need to go over that in depth. I think this kind of like 101 material, but there's a good reason for it. There's a good reason to celebrate it. We'll just leave it at another fun little linguistic, philological point, and then I'll kick it to you. Is the word Yule, right? We call this Yule time. Well, Helios, it's Yule, Helios. These words they come from a same source, in my opinion.
Yeah. Brilliant stuff, Chance. I appreciate you breaking it all down philologically for us. And I think this is a good time of the year to be grateful for what you have. Be grateful that winter is at its midpoint, so we're almost out of it. I don't know if it's as chilly where you are as it is where I am, but I am looking forward to the relief of more sun. But yeah, as we sort of wind down 2024, it's been a crazy year, and you've talked about a lot of fantastic stuff on your show. So before we wrap this episode up, just remind the folks where they can go to continue with the InnerVerse as we move into 2025.
Same place it's always been. InnerVersePodcast.com is the hub. I do video versions of all my content. So if you're into that kind of thing and some of the material, it really helps to have a video, then my YouTube or Rockfin or Odyssey or not BitChute. I stopped using BitChute. It's got stuff, but it hasn't been updated for a while. It's like kind of crappy interface. But Rumble, my Rumble's doing great. Those are all places you can go. I've also got a Patreon, so you can get the extended content or the full versions of these Inner World shows, which are like, the work that me and Dylan have been doing this year on that bonus show is basically a better than a college level course in comparative mythology, linguistic philology, and symbolic literacy. I cannot talk that up enough. If you enjoyed the stuff I was describing about Noah and Kronos being similar, or if you were baffled by it, go find those episodes where we talk about it. And I start at the beginning with Inner World, and it will make sense. We go through it much more slowly and methodically. It's really good. And you can see me on Wednesdays live, usually with our mutual friend Slick Dissident. He typically co-hosts with me on my Vibrant show, and InnerVerse comes out. It's not as regular of a schedule since I had a baby, but I'm thinking in 2025, I'll get a little more regular again. But there's a solid 45 or so episodes from the year, everything from holistic healing to, talking about the Jewish question with my friend Dr. Moshe, a card-carrying Jew, so it was allowed. just 3 weeks ago. And, conspiracy content in a healthy consciousness perspective, the questions of life, the universe, and everything, the afterlife, spiritual metaphysics. We get into everything. It's awesome. And beyond that, I always like to bring the lens of my work in biofield tuning to how I see everything else in the world. They say learn one thing and you can learn anything. And the further I've gone with that client work, the more I can see how the mechanics of the human energy field and the anatomy of it are so applicable to all the other dynamics of how energy works on Earth. And if that's something you're curious about, I've done my best to make it accessible to learn about the anatomy of your aura or your energy field, how memory, emotion, and repression work in context to the effects on your health. I think back in the day, you and I had a more in-depth conversation about that on My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. But learn more at my website, innerversepodcast.com/sound-healing. And if you scroll down, I've got all the information about what type of experiences and correspondences to the body happen at what parts of your energy field and related to what kind of emotions and beliefs. And I've got some videos on it. I've got slides up on that page. Really, I think the resources I provide there, if you were motivated like I was, you could learn how to do what I do for yourself without even taking a class. And that's what I ultimately want, to share this human birthright of how our energy and mind work to either support or diminish our health. And not just our health, but our experience of life, our positive or negative level of synchronicity between our inner and outer world, how stuck or how fluid we feel, So you can get on that page, the Sound Healing page. It's under the Get Tuned tab on my website. Learn a lot for free. Or if you want to get with a specialist like myself, you can always get on my schedule for a session, and it can be life-changing. The potentials are dramatic. Like one guy I had recently, we just had our second session. He didn't need his reading glasses anymore after our first session. That was just after the first one. Like, he was no longer nearsighted. So wow. These are the things that are possible are mind-blowing. Nothing is guaranteed, but we can sometimes really get to the bottom of some of the causes of a health problem and shift it rapidly. So I appreciate your time, Mark, for the patience with me, because we had to reschedule this like 38 times because of both of us had different reasons.
Yeah,
but
no big deal.
You're so chill. Like, I knew it was all good. I didn't even worry about it. But I just want to thank you for being a great, gracious host, such a good improv yes and guy, and you do awesome work. I tune into your show every now and again when I see a guest that I really want to hear you riff with, and just keep doing what you're doing. I love you, brother.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. And yeah, same to you, and God bless your endeavors, especially with the growing family and the little one. I know you're probably got to get back to them as soon as we wrap this conversation up, and rightly so. They need your tender love and care, especially now. So yeah, I think this is awesome, man. Great conversation. We got into some topics that I think are at the very least a good introduction for everything that you have going on with Inner World, and of course InnerVerse is the main flagship show, and everything you're doing with the biofeedback tuning. I'm very curious about. I haven't had the time personally to really invest in that, but I should. So you might be hearing from me about that in the new year. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, follow up with Chance in the episode description. All of his links will be there. And until next episode, immerse yourself in the moment wherever you are in the now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this conversation with Chance. And as he mentioned, it was supposed to happen a month ago, but we made it happen the beginning of this week, and we got to talk a little bit about some Christmas stuff towards the end, which I think made it all the sweeter to post this episode I have some bonus episodes that I'm going to be releasing on the Patreon, and I might post one of those this weekend. Of course, the month is almost over, but there will be a new episode out before the new year. I'm going to put one out on the 30th. I'm not sure what that'll be yet, so we'll see. So yeah, big shout out to Chance. The InnerVerse is a great podcast. It's a podcast that I've been a peer of for a long time. And the Inner World podcast is a podcast that I'm relatively new to as far as I'm concerned, but it's a podcast that's been going on for about a year or so now, and I highly recommend it. I want to get Chance's co-host on the show. I believe his name is Dylan. So we'll be getting him on the show, and yeah, wonderful stuff. That's really all I have to say. I hope you guys had a wonderful holiday. Merry Christmas if you're listening to this as it is released. If you're listening to this in the future or in some other country you don't even celebrate Christmas, well, hope you're doing well. Merry Christmas to all of you all around the world, to all of you who celebrate Christmas as I do, as my family does. Happy holidays to all the other holidays that people celebrate this time of year. And like I said, we'll have another episode out, a new episode out by the end of the new year, and some bonus episodes on the Patreon. All week I've been putting YouTube videos out, and we reached 10K. What a milestone. So incredible. Yes, it's so incredible. We got 10K subscribers on YouTube, and I almost gave up on the YouTube for a while. Somewhere around 3,000 subscribers, I was like, whatever, who cares? YouTube's banning us anyways. But it seems like things are turning around, and 10K subscribers might be a sign that that is the case. So if you enjoy the video version of the show, I have released some archived episodes that were previously only available to supporters. Those are all on the YouTube, and there'll be a couple more releasing tomorrow and Friday. So, well, I guess today and Friday. So look forward to those, and yeah, thank you all for supporting the show. I could definitely use any donations that people can muster up at Mystic Mark on Venmo or PayPal. That goes a long way this time of year. You know, bought some gifts for the family and all that good stuff. So it definitely helps if people want to send in a donation. I have to give a huge shout out to Tanya, because she has just been such a light, such a shining light, sending in not just one but multiple Venmo donations over the past few weeks, and that really helped this holiday season. So big shout out to Tanya, and big shout out to everybody on the Patreon who support me and help me continue to put this show out for free twice a week. I mean, come on, folks. I mean, I pretty much gave up on cutting the episodes in half because you guys complain so much, and it's difficult to keep a guest for 3 hours. Not every guest wants to stick around for 3 hours, and I would like to continue to do that. Maybe we'll make a plan of doing that like twice a month. Twice a month we'll do like a big episode, and we'll make it basically a 3 hour long episode for supporters, and just an hour and a half for those of you who want to be barnacles floating along on the free podcast. That's fine. I don't mind you. You guys all help. You listen to the ads. That's a way of supporting the show. Even if you skip past them, you're still sort of helping. So I appreciate all of you. You guys are incredible. Even the people who listen to the show for free. But an extra special thank you to all of you who support the show, even though you probably don't even listen to this version of the episode, because there's a whole different version of the episode that you get without ads and all that stuff, no interruptions, and it's on the Patreon or the Substack. It's an entirely different RSS feed, And if you're plugged into that, you might not even be hearing this thank you. But either way, thank you to all of you who support me. And please continue to do so, because we want to keep this podcast going. I also want to get out and do some really cool stuff in 2025. I was blessed to have been gifted something really neat. My mom, my lovely mom, shout out to my mother. Big thank you to my mom. She gifted me this Christmas a DJI gimbal, which I asked her to get me, but either way, super nice of her. Basically, I'm able to film stuff in a really professional way. So we're going to be putting stuff on this YouTube channel, and it's not just going to be interviews. So look forward to that in 2025. I know I thought I was going to do that this year, but whatever. No more empty promises. Let's do it. 2025. Hold me to the fire, folks. Join the Patreon. Motivate me. Let's get past 300 people on the Patreon. And with that, immerse yourself in the moment wherever you are in the now.
Dashing through the webs on a dark and shadowed site, overclassified docs, digging deep into the night. MK Ultra plans, chemtrails in the sky. Oh, what fun it is to learn the government's big lie. Conspiracy bells, truth is on display. Oh, what fun it is to blow the mainstream lies away. Hey, conspiracy bells, secrets we unveil. Come along and question things, it's time to lift the veil. Bigfoot in the snow, UFOs up high, reptilian overlords with cold unblinking eyes, crop circles align, ancient pyramids glow. Who built them and why? Do we really even know? Conspiracy bells, truth is on display. Oh, what fun it is to blow the mainstream lies away. Hey, conspiracy bells, secrets we unveil. Come along and question things, it's time to lift the veil. Bigfoot in the snow, UFOs up high, reptilian overlords with cold unblinking eyes, crop circles align, ancient pyramids glow. Who built them and why? Do we really even know? Conspiracy bells, truth is on display. Oh, what fun it is to blow the mainstream lies away. Hey, conspiracy bells, secrets we unveil. Come along and question things, it's time to lift the veil. Whoa.
After just 3 weeks of using EP Protocol by MaximusTribe.com, the results are in. I've doubled my testosterone with just one daily pill, and I have to tell you, I feel amazing. I have more energy, better productivity, and that extra level in the gym. Give it a try and get $100 off using code PODCAST100 at MaximusTribe.com.
Results may vary and outcomes aren't guaranteed. Claims have not been reviewed by FDA, and Maximus does not claim to treat or prevent disease. MaximusTribe.com.
Over the last 75 years, over 10,000 chemicals have been introduced to our food supply. Yet the EU only allows 300 food additives. But at Thrive Market, we bring our members the highest quality brands and restrict more than 1,000 ingredients found at conventional grocery stores, making the switch as easy with our Healthy Swaps scanner, which finds better versions of all your favorite pantry, snacking, and home essentials without the added junk, dyes, and fillers. Plus, it's all delivered straight to your door. So if you're looking to shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health, go to thrivemarket.com/podcast and you'll get 30% off your first order and a free gift.